What, you have a podcast?
Really?
Computer, show the historical documents.
It's
just time for a theocratic monarchy. King Trump, for life. Let's go.
I said, no, Sean, I'm going to be a dictator. I said that.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Recovery from Politics Podcast. I am your host, Kyle Frame, and today is Monday, February 12th, 2024. Hello, congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs and the Biden administration for everything they're doing. Pardon, we have a visitor. Come here, Indy. Oh, this is Indy. Short for Indiana Jones, because we got him and he was adventurous. Yes, all he needs is the hat. He's definitely the more outgoing of his, between him and his brother. Brother named Shy, for obvious reasons. Of course, he's not so shy anymore. He was just shy when we first got him. But anyway, this is Indy. Hello, Indy. He's been very needy today. He does not like that Daddy's working. But anyway, congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs for winning the Super Bowl. Thank you very much. You saved me from a lot of my family that lives in Sacramento. Close enough to San Francisco, of course. They would have driven me crazy. I really don't mind. I haven't cared for the 49ers for a long time. But anyway, Usher's performance was okay, if we want to talk about that. I saw the Argyle movie this weekend. It was cute. Don't go in, like, expecting deep super spy thriller stuff. Like, this is a popcorn movie, which is totally fine. It is a popcorn movie. I saw with some critiques, though, it was kind of silly. Some people were like, oh my god, the CGI sucked, it was terrible. And so the main character of this story is seeing things two ways. She sees things real life, and then because she's a novelist, she writes about spy thrillers, she sees her characters doing spy things. And the CGI is supposed to look comically over the top, kind of silly when it's her imagining things. And then when she's not imagining things, it's less silly. So a lot of people were complaining about the CGI, and I mean, sure, but my only complaint with it was the opening. Like, the first act takes too long. Like, I was like, come on, let's go. But once it gets going, it's perfectly fine. It's just an entertaining flick. Don't go into it thinking too much. Let's see. I do want to give props to the Biden administration for finally doing something right. So after Friday's fiasco, or Thursday's fiasco, where they released the WHO report that totally screwed over Biden and, you know, everything, the next day, Friday, I didn't get to it because it was later, Kamala Harris, the vice president, gave a speech in his defense. Lights out. It was a great speech. I was hoping to talk about that, but some other stuff happened over the weekend, so we'll talk about that instead. But I do want to give props, because for the longest time, my biggest complaint has been, hey, idiots, everyone's only worried about Biden's health and age because no one trusts his vice president to pick it up when he leaves. Like, we all acknowledge he's an extremely experienced, knowledgeable person. He knows how the world works. And he's obviously, he knows his history and everything else. Like, we get that. We're not so sure about Harris. She obviously didn't campaign well. I mean, she didn't become president. And she wasn't even, like, second at all. Like, she just wasn't doing well. Some of her attacks bumbled. She was not impressive, basically. Now, she could be presidential material, but I just haven't seen it. And I have to say, this speech that she gave last Friday was a step in the right direction for her. I think they need to do that more. A lot of people are like, Biden needs to go out and just give interview after interview and prove that he's mentally there. And I'm like, no, I think my original statement still stands, because the narrative is Biden is mentally failing. He's sundowning, they want to call it. The best way to combat that is not to have Biden out. Keep doing Biden sparsely, sparingly, like you're doing. Supplement it, though. You know who should be doing an interview every day? You know who should be on the TV constantly? Vice President Kamala Harris. She should be out, and that will ease people's concerns when they can see, oh, okay, she is capable. She is a strong woman. She can be I can see her being president. You got to get people ready for that. If we can look at her and say, yes, that's a future president. Okay, if Biden passes, yes, it's bad. People dying is bad. But at least we know somebody there is competent, who's got their hand on the wheel, and we're all going to be fine. That's the concern. So props to them for doing that. I hope that this is the first of many things. I hope that she gets out there and she really should be the face of the campaign. We know who Biden is, right? Like Biden is known. He's been running for president since 1980. We know who this guy is. We don't need to see him out on the campaign trail anymore. We know who he is. We know what he says. He's fine. We need to get the unknown quantity out there and make her known. And again, if for some reason the Biden administration does not think that she's up to it, and this would be on their own, personal, hey, we work with her and we don't think she's up to it, then they need to move off her sooner rather than later. But yeah, anyway, I did want to give props though, because that speech was actually pretty good. She did a very good job delivering it. It was a good response. It was a very good response. Hopefully they'll take the right lesson from that and push her out way more often. I was very disappointed. None of the Sunday talk shows had her on. None of them had Biden on. The only response I saw at all, he didn't even give a Super Bowl halftime or a Super Bowl interview, which is kind of a thing I think he should have, especially after the Thursday thing. And if not him, it should have been Harris. Neither one of them really made a statement on Saturday, except to put out a really bad commercial. Yeah, it was online, so you didn't see it during the Super Bowl. They weren't going to pay for that. But anyway, props to Harris and props to the Biden campaign for actually putting her out there and giving her something to do and something to say that was like prime time and it was out there. It wasn't hidden on the back page of something. So good for that. But unfortunately, we have to talk about the rest of the world. So here's that. So Donald Trump said a thing.
They asked me that question. One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills.
Okay, so this is going to be another one, just like last time. There's like a lot to get to, so I'm going to try to race through this as quickly as possible. Apologies. So everyone's focusing on what he said and how that's going to affect the world, and that is very important. But I want to focus on the crowd cheering that statement, because if you did hear, like, he said all that word salad, and then the crowd was like, yay, that's great, that's wonderful. And a lot of people are wondering, like, how the hell did we get here? Because it's one thing for a candidate to say this and, he's not booed off the stage. It's another thing for a candidate to say this and is met with silence or nobody pays any attention. And it says something entirely different when a candidate says this to thunderous applause. Personally, I blame the George W. Bush presidency. Now, caveat, I do blame him for 9/11. Spoiled rich kid who never worked for anything before in his life, became president, and then he felt untouchable. So when the CIA director came to him and said, hey, dude, we have this terrorist who's going to attack us with airplanes, his response was, quote, all right, you've covered your ass, end quote. That is a quote from the president telling the CIA director. Anyway, now every administration before this would have circled the wagons and brought the various intelligence agencies together. This is totally normal. So hypothetically, the FBI director, the CIA director, they go to the president, which is what they do, and they say, hey, we got this intel. President's like, okay, cool. Pushes the button for his secretary and says, hey, tell all the heads of these departments to meet here at the White House. We're going to have a meeting with all the heads and tell them to bring their expert on Middle Eastern affairs or terrorism or whatever the hell. And they would all get in a room and the president would actually coordinate things to make sure that the administration, that the independent agencies are speaking to each other and sharing information properly. And the president is there to do what presidents do, which is to guide the situation. Bush did none of that. Okay, this is what the executive branch used to do all the time. That was their job, right? I mean, the executive branch runs all these agencies. So yeah, that's what happens. But after Bush's monumental failure, the Republicans quickly backtracked on this idea of big government, and they went ahead and created the Department of Homeland Security, strictly to fill the void of their weak-ass president. And then the weak-willed Democrats, cowed by fear, went along with it rather than stand up and demand his resignation. Now, Homeland Security isn't the reason for NATO's fallen stature among Republicans. It was the response to 9/11. Okay, so caveat over. Now we're going to get into it. Rather than pursue the terrorist attacks and the terrorists through the traditional avenue of normal police actions and diplomacy, Bush opted for wars of choice. Again, these were wars of choice. Neither Afghanistan nor Iraq, there was no threat from them. Then they went further. They mismanaged those wars, resulting in trillions of dollars of debt and thousands of soldiers dead, wounded, and maimed. Now, many patriotic young men and women answered the call for what they believed to be, it was their World War II, a righteous cause with clear bad guy, and us once again as heroes. This wasn't Korea or Vietnam, where success was relative and exactly who the bad guys were was gray at best. So we launched into Afghanistan seeking out one Osama bin Laden, the 9/11 mastermind, except we didn't just launch there. There was a whole war on terror, and terrorism is global. They don't have borders. So the American people were a little confused. A war in a country is simple to understand. You can pull out a map, you can look at it and go, oh, that's where we're at war. Cool. A global war where the whens, wheres, and hows change by the minute is very difficult for the average American to understand. They would hear about, frequently there'd be a story about American soldiers either doing the killing or being killed in Africa. And it's like, why are we in Africa? Like, when did we declare war in Africa? We did not. Then there was the question of what to do after we had won. Afghanistan fell pretty quick. The Taliban was on the run, hiding in caves. However, since Bush and Cheney had corrupted the intelligence departments, no one could warn them that while the Taliban was bad, there was no good option to replace them that the people in Afghanistan would accept. So we had to prop up a democratic regime and keep them safe for as long as possible. Meanwhile, thousands of dead Afghans' remains were still warm when Bush and Cheney decided to launch a full-on attack on Iraq under the shadiest of intelligence. Now, for its part, I believe them at the time. I was 22, 23 when this shit was going on. I was also in the military, so I did have a bubble around me. However, my alarms went off when we sent Colin Powell, our most trusted, avatar, to the UN to tell them this is why we need to go take out Saddam Hussein, and failed. And I was like, okay, stop. If Colin Powell couldn't convince the world that this was necessary, maybe what we have is not so great, right? And it turns out that initial instinct of mine was correct. I don't want to claim some kind of clairvoyance or craziness about it. I mean, it didn't pass the sniff test. It was like, dude, it's not like we sent Bush himself to go argue it. Like, that guy couldn't argue that. We sent Colin Powell. Like, the world usually listens when he speaks, right? You couldn't get anyone else to do it, and so that's all. So now we do this, but Iraq, they had a villain and a country. Saddam Hussein had to go. So once again, the idea of who would replace him, the people would accept, was never really even asked. Bush declared mission accomplished famously on an aircraft carrier after flying himself in for the ultimate macho man alpha male photo op. Soon after, reality set in. The bad guys weren't really bad enough to justify all of this. Again, Afghanistan and Iraq were not Osama bin Laden. Like, he was the bad guy, but we couldn't find him. And our good guys were being supplemented with hired thugs like Blackwater to avoid prosecution for just straight up murdering civilians, which is a true thing. And then, furthermore, the conservative ideology took a huge hit with its rebuilding strategy. They were literally crowing, I remember this, prior to going into war, that finally they would show the world how to rebuild a country the conservative way, to counter FDR and Truman's success with rebuilding France, Germany, Japan, and others following World War II, and it failed miserably. Just briefly, FDR and Truman sent a ton of money to the countries after World War II, and they hired the locals to do the work to rebuild their own nation. This resulted in the locals being employed and also well paid And they rebuilt their economies because obviously if you pay somebody, they have money to go spend. So it helped rebuild their economies and also had some sense of civic pride. It's pretty hard to bomb a school that you helped build with your own hands. I mean, we paid them to do that. So it's not so difficult if the invaders who blew up the original school now brought over more of their people to build it while you sat back and watched without employment. To be fair, the conservative plan worked perfectly. Companies like Halliburton made billions of dollars off of government contracts and your tax dollars. The problem was people kept dying. An insurgents had taken root. It wasn't a bright idea to dismantle entire militaries and not provide them with work. After all, what would happen if you're an emergency ordnance disposal, EOD worker, who gets laid off with no benefits, no unemployment check, only to find out there is no work? But you still have a garage filled with your old equipment. For Bush's entire term, we saw trillions of dollars towards the efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan, but hardly anything to American citizens who were victims of Hurricane Katrina. So Iraq ended under Obama, but Afghanistan continued for the rest of his term. That's, over 16 years. In 2016, when given a choice between hawk Hillary Clinton and perceived dove Trump, why was it shocking to anybody that Trump would win? I remember this was like the only thing we could, all of us hated Trump and we hated Hillary and we were all talking and we're like, well, here's one thing I know. If I had to pick which one was more likely to start some shit, it would be Hillary. Now, Trump does start shit. I want to be very clear with that. He does start shit, but he does it accidentally because he's a fuckwit. But he doesn't start wars. I'll give him that. But he does do a lot of accidental almost shit. He almost started a nuclear war with North Korea and almost went full-blown war with Iran before he got cold feet and backed out, which, some people want to say cold feet like a negative. I'm like, was it though? I mean, I get it, but I don't know. History's going to have to tell on that one. It was a little too soon for us to go, yeah, you should have gone whole hog into it. So for now. So, no new wars. And he negotiated an American retreat from Afghanistan. But if you fast forward into Biden's presidency, he had no fucks to give about the retreat from Afghanistan. Complete and utter chaos. Then Ukraine. Now Israel versus Palestinians. And at first Biden bear hug Bibi, but now the war crimes being committed are harder and harder to ignore. So, quick conclusion here. We've been through over 20 years of just straight war. We have paid trillions. We have lost thousands of lives. We have wrecked millions of lives. Just our own. Screw the world. Seriously, just the United States. There are a lot of people here with PTSD from either going to the war or knowing somebody who went to the war and came back different or not at all. This is a very serious thing. So I get it. People, Trump is using NATO as a placeholder for all of people's negative anti-war shit. The pain and the PTSD and the misery that's going on there. Trump's using it as a placeholder. So, it's kind of hard to take him seriously, but at the same time, it's he knows what he's saying causes problems. We'll get into that, but yeah. You have to understand, these people who are cheering, I think it's just because we just had 20 years of war, and that was with NATO, so what the fuck good is it? Do you see I think that's where it comes from. I really do. I think Bush and Obama to a lesser degree, and then Trump, we just saw all this shit happening all the time, and it's really wrecked us. And so, again, I think NATO's just a placeholder. It's this thing that we don't understand, and it means war, and we don't want war. We're tired of this. We don't want it. And I think that's where it comes in. Okay, so a little bit about NATO and my understanding of it. NATO is, without a doubt, the most successful military alliance in world history. Okay. Many critics will point to how much it costs. Especially America spends billions, almost $1 trillion per year on our military alone. And you compare that to anyone else in NATO, it doesn't seem like that much. Now, I would caution you. Per GDP, most NATO countries are at least at 2%. So 2% of their GDP pays towards their military. Us, we pay 3.5% of our GDP. So I want you to understand, like, the numbers, it's a ratio thing. That's why it's so far off. And if you're only looking at the bottom price tag, trillions of dollars, I agree, it's outrageous. But I mean, keep it in context. It's like these other countries are still spending a lot. It's just they're not as large and as wealthy as the United States. This, to me, it makes complete sense. Now, we do spend more than anybody else, but this is also by design. You have to understand, after World War II, there was a silent agreement. It was like, okay, Europe, you have dragged the whole world into war twice in one generation. You don't get huge militaries anymore. We get a huge military. We will defend you because we can't trust you not to war with each other. Because keep in mind, like, Germany versus France had just dragged everybody into war twice. Extremely destructive war. I mean, we just came up with the nuke too, so add nukes to it. It's like, look, we don't need another one of these. Okay, so we're gonna fix this shit. We get big military. We'll defend you if something happens. You are not allowed to have one. Japan and Germany are limited in military size because of the treaty, their surrender after World War II. We have bases in their countries specifically to defend them. No one would attack Japan or Germany without risking attacking America and then getting absolutely fucking wrecked for it. So, if you remove NATO or even weaken it, countries like China and Russia will take advantage. And I'm going to give you an example here. Take Taiwan. If you believe in self-determination, then you should be on the side of the Taiwanese independence. I do. One of the reasons China doesn't just fuck with Taiwan isn't 100% the United States. Hear me out. If China fires on a single American ship or jet, all of NATO is required to respond. The EU, which is the trade arm basically of the European nations, would halt all trade with China. So would America. Suddenly, China is in a multi-front war over Taiwan. Their economy is also wrecked. They have no allies. Russia's not going to help them over fucking Taiwan, I guarantee you. So, by itself, Taiwan poses no threat to them. It's just an annoying, stupid little island off its coast. And if you're China, and NATO is fully strengthened and everything, is it really worth risking complete annihilation? There's no sure thing that you're going to win. But if it's just China versus America, or if Trump gets in and says we're not going to respond to NATO, if it's just China versus Europe, well, would America defend Taiwan alone? Would all of Europe respond? What if your country needs Chinese products or materials? I mean, Europe is a huge place, and each country has its own trade deal going on, right? Say Germany has something, or they need something specifically from China. Are they going to be like, well, it's a real shame what happened in Taiwan. We'll sternly worded, statement. That's very possible. They do that shit all the time with other countries, right? The same questions of China risking utter devastation over Taiwan gets reversed. Would America, if America decided, fuck NATO, but we're still going to save Taiwan, would America willingly wreck its own economy by cutting off all trade with China, then willingly sacrifice all the ships and sailors in a war over Taiwan? Would we really go to bat for Taiwan if it was just us? Because, okay, if we cut off trade with China, what would end up happening is we would then need to rely heavily on the EU. We would have to, go out and make new trade deals with other people to compensate for everything we're losing from no longer trading with China. But if we're going at it alone, what's to say that China doesn't look at the EU and say, hey, if you want to keep trading with us, don't fucking trade with them? You see, it adds a whole other thing. Whereas if there's NATO, China wouldn't even bother asking because they already know the answer. Right? And then if America says, we're not defending Taiwan, would Europe willingly wreck its economy? Would they do anything to China if China took Taiwan? If China took Taiwan tomorrow and America was like, yeah, hands off, we don't give a fuck, what would Europe do? I mean, right now there's a massacre, there's a genocide going on in China over the Uyghurs. No one's doing shit. If they took Taiwan tomorrow and America did not respond, and it was a complete and total genocide, a massacre, but America's hands off, would Europe even do anything? I don't think so. What would they do? Boycott the Olympics? That's about all they're capable of doing by themselves. That's what the alliance is for. NATO keeps Taiwan safe. But also, if you want to go into current events, NATO also is keeping Ukraine safe. Right now, NATO allies are supplying Ukraine with weapons. Russia doesn't attack them. In fact, there's been a few cases of an errant rocket that Russia fires that accidentally hits along their border, and Moscow is so fast to get on the phone and be like, dude, we're so sorry, we didn't mean it. It was an accident. But if there is no NATO, does Russia allow any European country to supply Ukraine or Georgia or any other former Soviet nation that Putin is interested in? You might think, well, Russia doesn't want a war with Finland. Sure, but you don't need to go to war with Finland to send a message. There's cyber warfare. They could block shipping lanes. They could suddenly openly fire on their borders because it's just Finland, right? America's not coming to their aid. It's just Finland. And Finland isn't about to go to war with Russia over Ukraine. If Russia just says, Finland, we will stop fucking bombing you as soon as you stop helping Ukraine, at least half the population of Finland would be like, yeah, why are we getting bombed for shit going on in Ukraine? This is Ukraine's problem. Like, it's so easy for human beings to justify and rationalize it and back out of a bad situation. Right? It isn't Germany and France, Britain and Turkey and Italy and half a dozen others. It's just Finland. So yes, NATO costs a lot. But what we get in return for our spending is not as clear an X's and O's numbers game. It's not just money. We get peace. Russia currently is only focused on Ukraine. If NATO didn't exist, they would be focusing on a hell of a lot more people. The world gets a lot more peace with NATO. Russia and China have to not be overt and have to not pull the trigger a hell of a lot more often than they would otherwise. In trade deals, Europe knows why they have money to spend on free education and free healthcare. So we typically get favorable trade deals with them more often than not. We don't win all the time. And that's why Trumpists are all pissed off and fumey. The negotiations and compromise, meh! That's a good thing. But we win more often than we would without NATO. So, years of war, debt, and gutting our education system has led to a fundamental misunderstanding of the entire thing. We're going off of emotion because our current world does not allow time for deep and critical thinking. We don't know how to analyze and interpret current world events. We don't understand the entire system because it's very complex and historically covers decades. The people who crafted this idea of NATO and the UN, they're all dead. Hardly anyone advocates for either anymore. No one gets on the stump and is like, fuck all of you, NATO and the UN are a good thing. Like, nobody does that. No American politician gives a speech outlining all of this. The details, the hard work. And honestly, it's not their fault. Would we even listen? I don't think so. I don't. Anyway, that's today's show. Good for a Monday, I guess. We'll see you tomorrow, hopefully. In the meantime, be safe.